Ever notice how some folks talk about African debt like it's, I don't know, a spending problem? Like, just cut back and everything's magically fixed?
Right, like it's that simple.
Yeah, oversimplification at its finest. So today, we're doing a deep dive on why that's just not even close to reality.
We're going deep.
Deep, deep down. And our guide for this journey is an article by development expert Carlos Lopes, written for ODI this year.
And let me tell you, when we say expert, we really mean it.
I believe it. His resume is kind of amazing.
Top advisor at the UN, even ran the UN Economic Commission for Africa for a while.
Wow.
Yeah, the guy's seen firsthand how these global systems work.
Yeah.
Or sometimes how they don't work, especially for developing countries.
Yeah, he doesn't just talk the talk, he's lived it. So Lopes lays out these three major factors that make this a debt dilemma, not just, a debt problem.
Big difference.
Huge. And the first one, honestly, kind of blew my mind. He calls it the global banker effect. Basically, this hidden advantage that richer nations have.
It's subtle, but man, the impact is huge.
Okay, so break it down for us. What is the global banker effect?
All right, so Lopes uses the example of the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS. Ever heard of them?
Rings a bell, vaguely. Something to do with banks, right?
You're like the bank for central banks, if you can picture that.
Okay, so like the top tier, they set the rules for everyone else.
Pretty much. They set the rules for the entire global financial system. After the 2008 crisis, they passed these regulations called Basel III. The idea, make banks safer.
Okay, makes sense. Who doesn't want safer banks?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, and here's where it gets tricky, these rules, good intention, all that they kind of assume a level of, financial stability, market access.
That not everyone has.
Bingo. Many African nations just don't have those built-in advantages.
It's like setting rules for a marathon, but some runners have to wear ankle weights or something.
Perfect analogy. It's an uneven playing field right from the start.
And that's the global banker effect in action.
That's it. Richer countries, because of their economic power, they become the preferred customers in the system.
Like having that premium credit card with all the amazing rates, perks that nobody else can get.
Exactly. But it goes even deeper than that. It's not just about perks. It's about massive wealth transfer.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
So Lopes, he cites this study by researchers Gaston Nieves and Alice Sedano.
Catchy names.
Right. And their findings, they're staggering. This global banker effect, shifting potentially trillions with the T of dollars from poorer nations to richer ones.
No way.
Just because of how the system is structured. Let that sink in for a second.
Okay, yeah, I see why you said staggering. That's a lot to process.
That's a lot of money.
It's more money than I can even fathom. Okay, so we've got this baked-in advantage for the wealthy. The second factor Lopes gets into is something we hear about all the time. Aid to Africa.
Right. Everyone's got an opinion on foreign aid.
But he makes this point that fixating on poverty reduction, which obviously is important,
Of course, got to help people.
misses this whole other crucial piece of the puzzle,
He's talking about liquidity.
which basically means,
Having the actual cash flow to make things work.
right, not just surviving, but actually running a country, investing, growing.
Exactly. Think of it like your household budget. It's not just about earning enough to scrape by,
You got to pay those bills on time.
right? Countries need that same kind of flow to function, invest in things like infrastructure, healthcare, education.
So it's one thing to help people climb out of poverty, but it's a whole other ballgame to make sure they don't fall back in because the system's rigged.
And Lopes ties this right back to colonialism's legacy, which, not exactly breaking news, but he connects the dots to today in a really powerful way.
So how does that history play into this liquidity crisis?
Well, colonialism often set up this dependence on exporting raw materials, oil, minerals, crops, you name it.
Got it. So they're relying on things with prices that can swing wildly.
Exactly. Volatile is the word. And that makes it incredibly tough to build a stable economy, let alone one that's thriving. It's like
A house built on a foundation of sand.
brutal, but accurate.
And on top of all that, Lopes drops this stat from the One campaign. Ready for this? Financial transfers to developing countries, they've actually gone down since 2014.
Yeah, you'd think it'd be the opposite, right?
Right. You'd assume in our super interconnected world, money's flowing to where it's needed.
But nope, the reality is those flows have plummeted.
Yeah.
And projections. Even worse. It's like,
Trying to fill a bathtub with the drain wide open.
exactly. Shows we're not just dealing with a lack of resources, but a whole system that's, well, broken.
Okay, so we've got these first two factors, the global banker advantage and this liquidity crisis, both rooted in like historical systems.
Deeply rooted.
And then Lopes hits us with his third point, and this one, I think a lot of people can relate to this on a personal level, getting judged unfairly.
Ah, yes. He's talking about credit rating agencies, those companies you always hear about in the financial news.
The ones that decide if a whole country's credit is good or bad.
Pretty much. They assess a country's risk, and that determines how much it costs them to borrow money. Think of it like a credit score for a whole nation.
And we all know a bad credit score equals higher interest, which equals, yeah, not good. So how does this tie into Africa's debt?
Lopes argues these ratings are often biased against African economies. It's like being denied a loan because you live in the wrong zip code. Even with perfect credit history, solid plan, the whole 9 yards.
So they're getting penalized for things they can't control.
Exactly. Like judging a company based on its performance 5 years ago.
So much can change in 5 years.
Especially in those rapidly developing economies.
Outdated data. What else?
They also often fail to account for growth potential. Many African nations, they're dynamic, young populations, tons of untapped potential. But those ratings models, stuck in the past.
It's like saying, because you struggled before, you'll always struggle, even if things are totally different now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's this. Lopes points out these ratings can be swayed by things that have zero to do with economics.
You mean like?
Political instability, perceptions of corruption, might be real issues, but don't reflect a country's ability to pay back debt.
Like getting a bad credit score because your neighbor's dog won't stop barking. It's just not right.
Not right at all.
But here's where I actually felt some hope. Lopes gives examples of countries that fought back.
Oh, yeah, they did.
Tell me about that.
Zambia, Namibia, Nigeria, they challenged their ratings, said, hey, this isn't fair, you're penalizing us unfairly. And guess what? Sometimes it worked.
No way! They changed their minds.
In some cases, yeah. The agencies actually bumped up those ratings, admitted they underestimated these economies.
So it is possible to challenge the system.
Absolutely. And get this, a UNDP report found that fairer, more accurate ratings, that could unleash billions, maybe even trillions more in financing for these countries.
We're not talking small change here.
Game changer territory.
Okay, so we've laid out the problems. This tricky trio, as we're calling it, of systemic issues keeping African nations stuck.
It's a lot.
I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed, to be honest.
Understandable.
But Lopes doesn't just leave us with a to-do list of impossible problems. He offers solutions.
He does, though they might not be what some people expect.
Yeah, no quick fixes here.
Nope. He's very clear. Band-aid solutions, not going to cut it. This requires a system overhaul.
Which sounds daunting, but
Yeah,
systems are made by people, right?
that's the point he makes. If we created them.
We can change them. Okay, so where do we even begin? What needs to happen to actually address this dilemma?
Lopes lays out a few key areas. First, and this goes back to that global banker effect, we got to address the power imbalance baked into the whole system.
So like rethinking how organizations like the BIS, that Bank for Central Banks, actually set the rules, what would that even look like?
It means pushing for more inclusive decision-making. Make sure developing countries have a real voice when those global financial rules are written. Not just an afterthought, but from the very beginning.
So rules written with them, not for them. Got it. What's next on Lopes' list? So we've got fairer rules for the global system. What else needs to change?
Second big thing Lopes hits on is, he calls it fairer financial flows. It's a big umbrella term, but basically making sure the money generated in Africa actually benefits Africa.
Sounds reasonable when you put it like that. But how? It's not like flipping a switch.
Right, super complex. But he gets specific, like tackling illicit financial flows. Sounds kind of shady, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Basically, money illegally leaving African countries. Tax evasion, corruption, that kind of stuff.
So crack down on that. More resources stay where they belong.
Exactly. Then there's tax havens, those places, where corporations, rich folks, hide money from taxes.
Ah, yeah, those places.
Estimates say Africa loses billions, maybe trillions, because of them.
Money that could be building schools, hospitals.
The works.
So that's 2 down. Cracking down on shady flows, going after tax havens. What's the third thing Lopes wants to see?
Reforming those credit rating agencies we talked about.
Right. Got to make them fairer.
More transparency, accountability. A system that actually assesses risk properly without bias.
Facts, not fear-mongering.
Exactly that.
Okay, so those are the 3 biggies, right? More balanced global rules, fairer money flows, and a just system for judging credit. but those are huge. What can, like, any of us listening actually do? This feels like a UN job or something.
It's definitely complex, but what's inspiring about Lopes, he doesn't just complain, he calls for action. And not just from, bigwigs, but everyday people.
Okay, so what can we do in our own little worlds?
More than you might think. Awareness is huge. The more we understand this stuff,
Yeah.
the more we see how it connects to our own lives, our choices. Maybe you support organizations doing work on the ground in Africa.
Donations, volunteering, that kind of thing.
Or even just who you talk to about this stuff. It all adds up.
So, like, our small actions, if enough people join in,
Can spark bigger change. Rarely happens overnight. It's not one magic solution.
it's about connecting the dots between what we believe in and the systems we're part of, even if it feels distant at times.
It's about recognizing we all have a role in building a more just world. And even just having this conversation, learning, that's a step.
Well said. And on that note, if you found this deep dive eye-opening, share it. Talk to someone. Pass along Lopes' article. Let's keep this conversation going.